Yeah.
Okay, welcome back. Today we start the 8th chapter of the 8 chapters, Maimonides Introduction, 8 chapter introduction to Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers. All right. Previously, right, we were talking about in the previous chapter about what are the barriers between man and God. And we said how the barriers between man and God are man's inequities, and you can remove these barriers by perfecting your character. The more you perfect your character, there's two types of virtues and inequities, right? There's intellectual / mental ones, and there's character, personal traits. So these are the two types. The more you work on yourself and perfect yourself in both of these planes, the more barriers you're ripping down between you and God, and the better vision you have, the better, more ability you have to perceive God in the world around you. All right, now one might say, well, these flaws in man's character, well, first of all, it's kind of built into man, right? Well, every man is flawed. We said you don't have to be 100% perfect in order to come close to God and have God reveal himself to you, right? To become a prophet. You don't need to be completely flawless. However, someone might say, I was born flawed in such a way where I have anger issues. I have difficulty. I'm unable to manage my anger, and therefore it's something I'll never really be able to overcome. I'll never be able to rip down that barrier. All right? So אי אפשר שיוולד האדם מתחילת עניינו בטבע בעל מעלה ולא בעל חיסרון. Says Maimonides, he starts off this chapter, he says, man by default, man isn't born with any of these virtues or any of these inequities. Man is born clean. כמו שאי אפשר שיוולד האדם בטבע בעל מלאכה מן המלאכות. Same way that a person isn't born with a profession, right? He says, I was born a lawyer. I came out of the womb with a briefcase. He says, no, it's something you need to learn. It's something you need to teach yourself. So too, same way man isn't born in any profession, so too he's not born with any virtue or any inequity. אבל, however, אפשר שיוולד בטבע מוכן למעלה או לחיסרון, בהיות פעולותיה יותר קלות עליו מפעולות זולתה. He says, however, a person could be born with, we'll call it like a readiness, right? A disposition more towards a certain virtue or more towards a certain inequity or certain flaw. For instance, maybe he has some sort of impatience in him that will help him, so to speak, acquire anger easier. However, unless you practice anger, you're not going to acquire that trait. So you're not born angry. You may be born with a certain disposition towards some sort of virtue or flaw. והמשל בו, for instance, כשיהיה אדם מזגו נוטה ליובש ויהיה עצם מוחו זכה לחוד בו מעט, שזה יקל עליו לגרוס ולזכור ולהבין העניינים יותר מאיש בעל ניחה לבנה, רב ולחיות במוח. All right, he's kind of going into, we'll call it ancient Middle Age perception of medicine. So it could be, we'll translate it to today's more understanding. He may have, some sort of like clarity of mind. He's able to think better than others, right? So it'll be easier for him to remember things. It'll be easier for him to learn new things than someone else. אבל אם יונח האיש ההוא המוכן במזגו אל זאת המעלה מבלתי לימוד כלל, right? However, if this person has this great fantastic mind, he has this photographic memory. He was born with a photographic memory. However, he doesn't read, he doesn't learn, he doesn't acquire an education. ולא יעורר כוחו, יישאר שחל בלי ספק. Right? He's going to stay a dummy. He's going to stay ignorant the rest of his life if he doesn't use that gift, doesn't utilize it to acquire knowledge and an education. וכן כשילמדו ויבינו זה האב הטבע רב הנכה, ידע ויבין, אבל בקושי. And there could be, on the other hand, someone who has difficulty retaining information, understanding things, making connections. He has difficulty remember things, but he sits down and he studies and he tries and he repeats over and over. Eventually, he will acquire understanding and knowledge, acquire an education. It'll just be more difficult for him. ועל זה המין בעצמו ימצא איש שמזג ליבו יותר חם ממה שצריך מעט, ויהיה גיבור, רצונו לומר מוכן לגבורה. So too, you can have a person who he's more hot-tempered, we'll say. He has like a higher temperature, and he'll have more of a readiness towards bravery than someone else. Right? And if he is trained to be brave, to maybe put himself in semi dangerous positions, right? Then he will acquire bravery very quickly, as opposed to someone else who doesn't have that same disposition. And someone else, right? He'll be cooler, right, than the average, than most people. And so too, he will be more ready towards being coward and being afraid and running away. However, if he's trained, right, if he's taught to be brave, if he exercises bravery, then he too will become brave. ואם יכוון בו הגבורה לא ישוב גיבור רק בקושי גדול, אבל ישוב כשיתגילו בלא ספק. All right, but so it's all dependent on your actions in the end of the day. You need to learn, and then you need to practice. The more you practice acts of bravery, then it doesn't matter if you were ready towards bravery or it's something that you'll acquire more difficultly. However, if you practice and train yourself, you can acquire that midah. ואומנם ביארתי לך זה שלא תחשוב השיגעונות אשר ישקרו חכמי הכוכבים אמיתיות שיחשבו שמולד אדם ישימוהו בעל מעלה ובעל חיסרון. He says, and why am I saying all this? I don't want you to believe these delusions of the astrologists, that they say, well, man, right? Well, if he's a Leo, for instance, I'm a Leo. If he's a Leo, then he has certain characteristic traits, right? And so definitely he's going to behave in a certain way, and definitely certain things are going to happen to him. He says, no, these are all maybe just dispositions towards certain traits. However, it's entirely in your freedom of choice to act upon it and to acquire those midot or not. Doesn't matter what your horoscope is. Doesn't matter what your genetic disposition is. Right, and they say that a person, he must comply, right, with whatever it is that the astrologers are predicting he's going to behave. אמנם אני יודע שהדבר המוסכם עליו מתורתנו ומפילוסופי יוון, כמו שאימתוהו טענות האמת, right? However, know that this is a matter of consensus. It's agreed upon both by the Hachamim of the Torah, the Jewish Hachamim, and so too the philosophers or the Greek philosophers, right? And this has been proven logically, שפעולות האדם כולם מסורות לו. All of man's actions, פעולות האדם כולם, all of man's actions, מסורות לו, are in his hand. מסורות means he has dominion over them, he has control over them. אין מכריח עליו בהם. There is nothing to force him to act in a certain way, ולא מביא אותו זולת עצמו כלל, and nothing other than himself can determine man's own actions. יתהו לצד מעלה ולצד חיסרון, right? Nothing will bring him more towards one a virtue or another, or one inequity or another, except for man himself. אלא אם יהיה הכנה מזגית לבד, כמו שביארנו. Except for maybe having a disposition leaning more towards one characteristic trait. But again, it's not the disposition that dictates your character, it's your actions. The actions that a person performs, and that is entirely in his hands. The more you repeat them, the more you acquire that characteristic. Right? So these dispositions will either make it easier or more difficult for a person to acquire these characteristics. It'll either make it easier, lighter, or heavier, more difficult. Says, however, for it to be dictated, meaning mandatory for him to behave in a certain way, or completely out of his reach to behave in a certain way, that does not exist. ואילו היה האדם מוכרח על פעולותיו, היו בטלות מצוות התורה ואזהרותיה. And if man was predetermined to behave in a certain way, he was forced to behave in a certain way, then the entire Torah, with all the mitzvot, the commandments, and the azharot, all the avirot that we need to abstain from, would be completely meaningless. It would be annulled. There's no point in the Torah. hakol sheker gamur, and the entire Torah would be a complete lie. Achar she'en bechira la'adam b'ma sheyaseh, because man has no choice in his actions. וכן היה מתחייב ביטול הלימוד והתלמדות. And then, if you believe this, then there's also, it's completely meaningless to learn. There's no mitzvah to study and to acquire either new profession or a new skill. Nothing matters. V'limud kol melechet mahashevet, right? Or to learn any kind of science or any kind of profession. V'yakol ze hevel ulvatala. And all this would be completely useless and meaningless. Achar she'ha'adam אי-אפשר לו כלל מפני המכריח שיכריחהו מחוץ לפי דעת האומרים זה, שלא יעשה הפעולה הפילונית, right? Because then it's all meaningless because man has no choice. He has to do whatever it is the stars dictated that he does, or he has to do whatever it is that his genetic composition dictates his personality and his behavior. ומבלתי שידע החוכמה הפילונית ושתהיה לו המידה הפילונית. Right? He would have to do these actions regardless of whether he acquired a certain profession or certain knowledge, or acquiring that knowledge would have been dictated to him. והיה הגמול והעונש גם כן עוול גמור. and so too reward and punishment for either good or bad behavior will all be inequity on God's part. How could you punish someone for behaving in a way that was dictated to him, that he had no choice? והיה הגמול והעונש גם כן עוול גמור, לא ממנו קצתנו לקצתנו, ולא מהשם לנו, right? Not us between ourselves. If someone misbehaves and he's taken to court and sent to jail, right? How could you punish someone for doing something that he's programmed to do? And so to God, it would be inequity on his side to punish us for something that he programmed us to do. שזה שמעון ההורג לראובן, אחר שזה מוכרח שיהרוג, וזה מוכרח שיהרג, למה נענו שמעון? Right, so you have two people, Shimon and Reuven and Shimon. Shimon has to kill Reuven, and Reuven therefore has to be killed by Shimon. Then how can you persecute Shimon for murdering Reuven if he had no choice and did it because that was the program? ואיך ייתכן גם כן עליו יתעלה צדיק וישר הוא שיענישהו על פועל שאי אפשר לו לא יעשהו. And then how could God be considered a just judge for judging someone for the actions that he had no choice, that he had to do? ואפילו השתדל שלא יעשהו, even if Shimon, right, would have done everything to prevent himself from murdering Reuven, he couldn't, לא היה יכול. והיו בטלות גם כן ההכנות כולם עד סופם מבנות הבא. Okay, so he would have no choice. So Shimon, even if he would have tried to avoid murdering Reuven, it's not in his hands. It was all dictated. He's just playing out the program that the stars dictated. And so too, והיו בטלות גם כן ההכנות כולם. All preparations would also be annulled and useless. עד סופם, מבנות הבתים, building houses, וקנות המזון, and going shopping and buying food, ולברוח בעת הפחד, and running away from something that scares you. כי אשר נגזר שיהיה, אי אפשר מבלתי היותו. Right? Because anything that was prescribed to happen, dictated to happen, then it has to happen. And nothing you do, no preparations, would matter. וזה כולו שקר גמור, and all this is complete lie, right? It's completely false. וכנגד המושכל, and completely against logic, והמורגש, and completely against everything that we perceive in the world, how you see how people behave. Everyone has control over their actions. The better prepared you are for something, right, then the better your chances of succeeding in it. Varisat Humat Torah, and all this is a complete destruction of the Torah. Veligzor al Hashem be'aven halila lo mimenu. And this is all ascribing to God inequities that he is beyond, that are below him. However, ha'emet asher en safek bo, right? One truth that there is no doubt regarding who שפעולות האדם כולם מסורות לו. All of man's actions are in his hand. אם ירצה יעשה, ואם ירצה לא יעשה. If he wants to behave a certain way, he will behave a certain way. And if he wants to not behave in a certain way, then he can abstain from behaving in a certain way. מבלתי הכרח שיכריחוהו עליו, without anything forcing him, coercing him to behave in a certain way. מפני זה היא ראוי לסבותו. And because of this, man is worthy of receiving a command from God. אמר, he says, ראה, נתתי לפניך היום את החיים ואת הטוב, ואת המוות ואת הרע. He says, behold, I have given before you today life and good, death and bad, והמוות וטהרה. ובחרת בחיים. Says, and you shall choose life. ושמה בחירה לנו בהם. So this is explicit in the Torah, that he gave us the ability to choose. וחיוב העונש למי שימרה. And he also ascribed what would be the result or the punishment of he who does not follow the mitzvot. And the reward, למי שיעבוד, to he who worships God and follows the mitzvot. אם תשמעו, אם לא תשמעו. It says, והיה אם תשמעו, right? והיה אם לא, כאשר תשמעו. It says, והיה אם לא תשמעו, if you don't listen. וחייב הלימוד והתלמדות. And he also commanded us to educate ourselves and to study the Torah. ולימדתם אותם את בניכם, right? You should teach your sons, your children, ולמדתם אותם, ושמרתם לעשותם, right? And you should learn the mitzvot, right? You should study them, and you should make sure to comply with them, to follow with them. וכל מה שבא בלימוד המצוות, and anything regarding studying the mitzvot, וחייב גם כן ההכנות כולם, כתוב בתורה, he also commanded us to prepare ourselves for any possible disaster. ועמד, ועשית מעקה לגגיך. Right? If you have a rooftop, you should put a fence around it so people don't fall off. This is why is he commanding us with these preparations? Why? Because things aren't dictated. It's all a function of how well prepared you are, right, for whatever comes your way. He says you should make this rail, this guard on your roof. This way you're not responsible for anybody getting injured. Right? He says you should prepare yourself, right? If you just got engaged or you just built a house, right? Then there's certain things, like you could be exempt from we'll call it an optional war, right? In case maybe this person's gonna die at war and he's not going to get to live in his new house or not get to spend time with his new wife, right? This is just for the first year in an optional war, right? Pen yamut b'milchama. What does that pen? What does that mean? In case. What does that mean? In case he dies at war. In case means it's not dictated. You have to prepare yourself. B'ma yishkav, right? You have to pay a person up an employee that's poor, you have to pay him right away. You have to, if he loans you something, you have to pay. You have to give it back right away. This is what's he going to sleep in? והרבה בתורה ובספרי הנביאים מזה העניין. And the Torah and the Nevi'im, especially the prophets, always telling the people to prepare for pending war, be prepared for when they come, right? Build the city walls, do teshuvah, right? Do teshuvah as a society, so you're a functioning society, you can get things done, you can work together. All this, all these preparations. However, what we find the Chachamim say, hakol bidei shamayim, hus mirat shamayim. I'm sure this is a phrase most of you have heard already. Everything is in the hands of God except for fear of God. Has anybody ever heard this before? There we go. This would seemingly contradict what we're saying. So what are the Chachamim saying? It says, and this is true. It says, this is a true statement. And this also has to do with what we're saying. יטעו בני אדם ויחשבו כיצד פעולות האדם הבאות בבחירתו שהוא מוכרח עליהם כזיווג פלוני. Right? So many times people will misunderstand the statement to say, well, some of man's actions, some of the things that happen to us are dictated, and we have no choice regarding them. For instance, zivug peloni, right? Matchmaking. God is the matchmaker, puts two people together, right? He says, there's a statement of the Hachamim that says, Arba'in yom nifneh, right? Yotzet bat kol u'machrezet, right? There's this voice from the heavens that comes out 40 days before the person's born. It says, bat peloni lifloni, right? The daughter of this person is going to marry this person, right? These are statements that would seemingly contradict what we're saying. Right? Or, we also have statements of the Hachamim saying, right? A man is going to make a certain amount of money this year, right? Right? So all these things, this is a misunderstanding of this statement. And we'll explain. Because this woman, right? If he would marry her properly, right, with ketubah, with kiddushin, right, vehi kesheralo, and she is permitted to him, right? Is not a kohen marrying a divorcee. This is a person who is entitled. He's permitted to marry. And he took her for the sake of reproducing, mitzvah, and this is a mitzvah, he's doing a mitzvah by marrying this woman. And God doesn't dictate you complying with the mitzvot. Right? And if this marriage is forbidden, it's a forbidden marriage, let's say a brother and sister, which is completely forbidden marriage, and it's an avera. And a person, and God does not dictate a person to make an avera. And so to someone who steals someone else's property, right? He robs the bank and he takes all the cash in the bank, or ginavo, or honalt, or he cheated someone, or he robbed someone, right? And he was taken to court and he denied and he made false testimony and he made a false oath. אם נאמר שהשם גזר על זה שיגיע זה הממון לידו ושיצא מיד זה האחר, כבר גזר בעבירה. So, in this case, if we would say that God said, no, well, this money, this property, God already decided it's going to be in his thieves' hand, right? Then we say that God decided or dictated an avira. And this isn't the case. אבל כל פעולות האדם הבאות בבחירתו בהם בלא ספק יימצאו המצוות והעבירות. כי כבר באנו בפרק השני. So we say all of man's actions are in accordance to his choice, his freedom of will, without any doubt. And on these things apply mitzvot and averot, only things that man can choose to do or to abstain from doing. As we already explained in the second chapter of the Shemona Perakim, shemitzvot HaTorah ve'azharotea hem befe'ulot asher la'adam bahem bechira. Right, all the mitzvot and the averot that a person does are in the actions that a person takes, that he has freedom to choose to either do or to not do. Sheyaseh v'shelo yaseh, right, that he'll either do or not. ובא חלק מן הנפש תמצא יראת שמיים ואינה בידי שמיים. And in that part of the nefesh is where we measure a person's yirat shamayim, his fear of God, right? So we said there were certain parts of the nefesh, man's cravings, right? Is the achenek margish. Sorry, not achenek margish, achenek mitorer. Over there, man can use that part of his nefesh in order to pursue certain actions, to execute actions that are either misvot and averot. So in that part of the nefesh is where you have the fear of God, יראת שמיים. ובחלק מן הנפש תמצא יראת שמיים, ואינה בידי שמיים, and that is not in God's hand. אבל נמסרת מבחירת האדם, כמו שביארנו. But that has been, we'll say, surrendered to man, right? Those actions, God surrendered, gave freedom to man to execute according to his own free will. אם כן, therefore, אומרם hakol, what they say, hakol bidei shamayim. So what are they talking about? They say everything is in God's hand. אומנם ירצו בו העניינים הטבעיים, אשר אין בחירה לאדם בהם. Says this is referring to the natural things that man has no control over. כגון היותו ארוך או קצר, right? Meaning man being tall or short. That's not something that's up to you, right? You can't decide as a child, I want to be a meter 85. I want to be I only want a meter and a half. I want to be able to reach the low shelves, you know. I want to be able to reach the high shelves. I'm going to be tall. I'm going to be a meter 90. I'm going to be 2 meters. That's not up to you. That's up to your genetics. That's up to your biology. Or whether it's going to rain or not. That's not really up to you. Or if said avino zakuto, right? Things have to do with the natural world around us. Is there going to be clear air, or is it going to be like a thin atmosphere? You can decide to go to high up in the mountains, or stay, let's say, in like Tel Aviv area where there's high humidity, but you have no control over the humidity, over the atmosphere in Tel Aviv area, or the atmosphere in the Jerusalem area. And everything like this around the world, right? Anything that is natural, you don't have control over. Zulat nuat ha'adam umnuhatum. Everything except for man's actions, his movements, and his resting, that is under man's control. ואומנם זה העניין אשר ביארו החכמים. And this issue that the Chachamim were explaining, שהמצוות והעבירות אינן ביד השם ולא ברצונו, אבל ברצון האדם, right, that the mitzvot and the averot that man does is not up to God, but they were surrendered to man to execute according to his own discretion. נמשכו בזה אחרי דברי ירמיהו, והוא אומרו, מפי עניון נוטסה הרעות והטוב, right? So they got this from what Yirmiyahu says, from the mouth of God, מפי עניון, לא תסה הרעות והטוב. God does not dictate evil behavior or good behavior. By the way, this is a pasuk we'll be reading soon on Tisha B'Av. This is from Echa. So we say Yirmiyahu wrote Echa, and he said, "Mipi anyon oteseh haraot v'hatov." God does not decide if good or bad is going to happen. Sheharaot him ma'asim haraim. So what is evil? These are evil deeds. I mean, in the pasuk over here, the literal meaning, he's talking about bad things happening, like the destruction of Jerusalem. It says God didn't dictate the destruction of Jerusalem. Your bad deeds dictated that. And who is responsible for your bad behavior? That's you. Shaharaot hima ma'asim hara'im. Right? Bad things happening is doing bad deeds. V'hatov hima ma'asim hatovim. And good is doing good deeds. Ve'amar she'Hashem lo gazar al ha'adam na'asot ra'ot tov. And so Yirmiyahu is saying that God did not dictate to man to behave good or bad. And therefore, because of this, that man has control over his actions, and he decides if he's going to behave properly or not, ראוי לאדם שיתאונן ויבכה על מה שעשה מן החטאים והעבירות. The man he should reflect upon himself, and he should mourn and be sad and cry for the evil deeds that he did, because he did it from his own free will, and no one and nothing made him do it. And this is what he says later on, the next pasuk. Ma'it onen adam hai, right? What should a man mourn over? Gever al hatav, right? This is in Echa. This is lamentations for the destruction of the temple. And he says, what should you mourn? What should you cry over? He says, your own sins, your own inequities. Ve'acharken shav ve'amar. And then he came back and he said again, he says also the cure for this disease of our bad actions is also in our hands. The same way that we sinned by choosing to do bad deeds, so too we can choose to do good deeds and rectify the situation. So don't cry over the destruction, which is just the result of your bad deeds. Cry over the bad deeds that you did that caused that situation. And then he says that you can also cure it. So cry over your deeds to correct your behavior and return, do teshuvah. And he says after that, he says we should reflect on our actions, and we should conduct an investigation. What did we do that led to this terrible outcome? And we should go back to God. Return to doing the mitzvot. Nisa lebavenu el kapayim el en b'shamayim. Right? We should elevate our hearts and our hands towards God in the heavens. So even, what we are now in starting the 9 days, right? We started the 3 weeks back in Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, 3 weeks of mourning of the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple. He says that's not what Jeremiah, with Yirmiyahu, is trying to get us to cry over. He says that's just the end result. Right? What do the Hachamim say regarding destruction of the temple? They say, well, you're gonna give the Romans, you're gonna give the Babylonians credit for destroying the temple. They just burned down a building. It says kemach tahun tahanta. They said you just grated down powdered already powdered flour. It says you didn't take the wheat and powder it down and turn it into flour. It says kemach tahun tahanta. It says it was already destroyed. As far as God was concerned, the building is just a building. Its meaning is the people that it represents, or that meant to represent God in the world. And if they are already completely corrupt, the building is meaningless. And what you did, Mr. Nebuchadnezzar or Especianus, right, is meaningless to me. And what Yirmiyahu is saying is, if you want to rectify the problem, it's not rebuild the building, it's first rebuild yourself, change your behavior, which led to this end result, right? Perfect your character, act according to the Torah, and then when you build the building, it'll be meaningful. Any questions so far? All right. Avan, המאמר המפורסם אצל בני אדם, וגם יימצא ממנו בדברי החכמים ובדברי הנביאים, גם כן. All right, so, but there is also, this a common understanding, right? We'll call it like common sense. And we also see the Hachamim say this a lot, and you find a lot of these statements also among the Nevi'im. והוא שישבית האדם וקימתו וכל תנועתו ברצון השם יתעלה וחפשו, and that is that man's actions many times it's like God commanded a person to sit or to stand or to go in a certain place, and this would seem to also contradict what we're saying. והוא מאמר אמיתי, and this is also a true statement על צד אחד, in one way. למטה, שאמרנו בה שברצון השם ירדה למטה. And this is like if a person takes a pebble or a rock and he throws it up in the skies, right, and it falls back down, that would say, well, it fell down in accordance to God's will. God wanted it to fall down. And that is true, right? Why does a rock that you throw up in the sky fall down? Okay, as well. God, he dictated that law of gravity. Right? Because God wanted the earth to be in the center, right? Or translated to today's understanding, God wanted things to fall down to the center of mass, right? That's where gravity is. And because of this, and because of this, every time you throw something upwards, it'll fall back down. And so too fire, all fire will go upwards. If we translate it today, it's because of difference in it's lighter than air, so it goes upwards. ברצון שקדם להיות האש מתנועה למעלה. לא שהשם רצה בעת שיתנועה זה החלק מן הארץ שיתנועה למטה. It's not that God now dictated because you threw a rock up, he said, no, I want this rock to fall back down. And every time someone throws a rock upwards, he says, no, I want this rock now to fall back down. Right? It's not how it works. God wanted things to fall back down to earth. So he dictated. So what does this mean regarding man? He says wants man to stand up, he wants man to move around. And over here we have some sort of discussion among the philosophers. Right, they say, we mentioned the Mutakalimun before. It's an Islamic philosophical school. So they say that God's will, right, moment after moment, he decides his will that he wants a stone to now fall here, from here to here, then from here to here, then from here to here, then from here to here, until it hits the ground again. But we don't believe this. It says this will of God was already dictated in the 6 days of creation when God created the world. And things will behave in accordance to their prescribed behavior, what we call their natural behavior, as was prescribed in the 6 days of creation. As it says, right? Shlomo HaMelech, he says, what was is what will be. Ma shehaya hu sheyeh, u'ma shena'asa hu sheyaseh. And what was done is what will be done. Ve'en kol hadash tahat hashamesh. And there is nothing new under the skies, meaning the world behaves as God prescribed in the moment of creation or in the 6 days of creation, and it'll continue to behave in accordance to those laws. And because of this, the Hachamim needed to come forward and say, שכל המופתים היוצאים חוץ לטבע, that all of these miracles that are supernatural, אשר היו, which happened in the past, ואשר עתידים להיות, ממה שיעד בהם, right? All these miracles, these supernatural, at least seemingly supernatural miracles that happen in the past, and those that will happen in the future, right? שיעד בהם כולם קדם הרצון בהם בששת ימי בראשית. He says all of these seemingly supernatural miracles were already prescribed during those 6 days of creation. Right? It says, even in Pirkei Avot, it says certain things were created, right, in the twilight of the 6th day, right? Pi HaBe'er, right, the mouth of the well of Miriam, which was a miraculous well. Pi HaAtom, right, the mouth of the donkey of Bilam, which was a miraculous donkey. So they say this was already prescribed, right? Pi Haaretz, also the opening of the earth that swallowed Korach and his entire clan over there. It says all these things were already prescribed in creation at the beginning. והושם בטבע הדברים אז שיתחדש בהם מה שיתחדש. And so it was already prescribed in their nature to behave this way when the time comes, 2,000 or 6,000 or whatever, however much time passed from the moment of creation, or millions of years, whatever it was, when the world was created, it was already decided that at this point in time, right, naturally, the earth is going to open up and swallow these people. וכאשר יתחדש בעת שצריך, נחשוב בו שעתה יתחדש. ואין העניין כן. However, the way we perceive it, it seems to us that when this, maybe it was an earthquake or a big, what's called bulan, this opened up, this ground opened up and swallowed these people, it seemed to us like a supernatural miracle, something that defies the natural order, or maybe even the splitting of the sea, something that defies the natural order to us, because we don't have this this perspective of the entire world. It seems to us that it was some sort of fluke in nature and some sort of supernatural event, but that is not the case. It was already prescribed in their nature when the world was created that this is going to happen. וכבר הרחיבו בזה העניין הרבה במדרש קהלת וזולתו. And the Hachamim, they expand on this a lot. There's many midrashim in Midrash Kohelet, right, that describe this. Ma'amara b'zeh ha'inyan, and one of the statements that have to do with this, Olam keminhago noheg, says the world behaves according to its regular behavior. Right? They also say regarding Yemot Mashiach, where all these miracles are prophesied to happen, the Hachamim say, Olam keminhago noheg, there are not going to be any changes in the laws of nature. It's all going to happen in accordance to the natural world as we know it. It may seem to us some sort of fluke. It may seem to us very unlikely that something like this could happen on its own. However, it's all in accordance to the natural order of the world. ותמצאם תמיד בכל דבריהם עליהם השלום, and you'll see always they're very consistent in all their statements. בורחים מטית הרצון בדבר אחר דבר ובעת אחר עת. That they prescribe some sort of a will to God that, you know, it's from here to here, from here to here, from here to here. He says, no, God's will is it's in the laws, and we're able to function within that rule and do things on our own. And in this way, We say regarding man, כשיקום וישב, that when he stands up and when he sits down, שברצון Hashem קם וישב, that in accordance to God's will, man stood up and man sat down. What does that mean? It means that God has a will for man to be able to do these things on his own. רצונו לומר שהוא שם בטבעו בתחילת בריאת האדם שיקום וישב בבחירתו. Right? That it's embedded in man's nature from the design of man, from when man was first created, that he has the ability to stand up and to sit down in accordance to his own free will. לא הוא רצה עתה בעת קומו שיקום. Not that God wanted man to stand up now because he stood up, או שלא יקום, that he shouldn't stand up, כמו שלא רצה עתה בנפילת זה האבן שתיפול, או שלא תיפול. Same way that he didn't dictate now, oh, now stone fall from here to here, now fall from here to here, now fall from here to here. But he put it in the laws of nature that if a stone is thrown, tossed up into the air, so it should fall down to the ground. וכלל העניין שתאמין, right? And this is the general thing that you should believe and understand. כי כמו שרצה השם שיהיה האדם נישב הקומה, רחב החזה, בעל אצבעות, the same way that God willed that man should stand erect, that should have wide chest and have fingers, כן רצה שיתנועע וינוח מעצמו. So too, God's will is that man should be able to move around and he should be able to rest in accordance to his own discretion. ויעשה פעולות בבחירתו, and he shall execute certain actions in accordance to his own will. אין מכריח לו עליהם. There is nothing, right? This is God's will, that there is nothing to obstruct us from executing our own actions. ולא מונע לו מהן, right? Nothing to prevent us from doing the actions that we choose to do. כמו שהתבאר בתורה האמיתית, as was explained in the Torah, the true eternal Torah, ואמירה, ואמרה מבארת זה העניין, and the statement of the Torah that says is, הן האדם היה כאחד ממנו לדעת טוב ורע, right? Behold, man, the regular translation for this, and we'll see it's not the Masorati translation. We'll see the regular translation is Hen ha'adam. Behold, man should be ke'ahad mimenu, as one of us, lada'at vara, to know good from evil, right? Ukvar bi'er ha'targum, right? And the translation of Onkelos has already explained what does this mean. Hapirush, that this means sheharason bo mimenu lada'at vara. That God's will is that man should know for himself or decide for himself what is right and what is wrong. Right? We explained this, I think, in two classes. There was one class on the tree of life and the tree of knowledge where we explained it, and also in Ilchot Teshuvah, Elul last year we would have explained. Also in our class on freedom of choice in our second course on the fundamentals of the Torah, right? So how does he explain this? Hen ha'adam, behold, man, haya ke'ahad, should be one, unique, in that mimenu, that from himself he can know the da'at tov vara. R'tzono lomar shu haya ehad ba'olam, right? That man should be unique in that this is in the first chapter. Don't remember. Of Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah, shu haya ehad ba'olam, that man should be unique in the world. רצונו לומר מין שאין כמותו מין אחר, שישתתף עמו בזה העניין, that there is no other species in the world that has this in common with man. Man is a unique species that אשר נמסר לו ומהו שמעצמו, from himself, ומן נפשו, from his own nefesh, ידע הטוב והרע. He shall know, or should acknowledge, he should decide the right and wrong. ויעשה איזה מהם שירצה, and he can act upon those decisions. He can execute whatever action he wants. ואין מונע לו מהם, and there's nothing preventing him from doing so. ואחר שהוא כן, and because of this, אפשר שישלח ידו, he can send his hand forth, ויקח מזה ואכל וחי לעולם, and he send his hand forth towards the tree of life, and eat from it, or devour it and destroy it, ואכל וחי לעולם, or sustain himself from it, and acquire eternal life. I'm not going to go too much into this now. We have an entire recorded class on it. Look it up, the tree of knowledge and the tree of life, according to the Rambam. But God is, bottom line, what he's saying is that since man has control over his actions, and he can choose to do either right or wrong, then we need to put a safeguard around the tree of life so that man doesn't eat from it. ואחר שהתחייב זה במציאות האדם, and since this is in man's nature, רצונו לומר שיעשה בבחירתו פעולות הטוב והרע, that man can choose to do either right or wrong, כאשר יעשה, whenever he wants, יתחייב ללמדו דרכי הטוב. So therefore, God needs to teach us what is the right way to behave. ושיסבהו ויזהירהו ויענישהו ויגמנהו, and that he will command us to do right things, ויזהירהו, and warn us or forbid us to do bad things, ויענישהו, right, and punish us for doing the bad, ויגמנהו, and reward us for doing the good. והיה כל זה יושר, and all this is God being a tzaddik, being straight with us. וראוי לו שירגין עצמו פעולות הטובות. And therefore man should teach himself, accustom himself to do the right, to do the good deeds, עד שיהיו לו המעלות, until he acquires these virtues, right? That man, we said at the beginning, man isn't born with these virtues, but as he practices proper behavior, he acquires these virtues. ויתרחק מן הפעולות הרעות, and he should abstain, stay away from bad deeds. עד שיסור ממנו הפחיתויות, אם הן נמצאות איתו, and abstain from bad deeds until he gets rid of all his bad qualities, if he has any, or whichever one he has. ולא יאמר שהם בעניין שאינם יכולות להשתנות. And man shouldn't say or think that these inequities that he has is nothing he can do about it. He can't change who he is. I am who I am, and that is who I am, and that's it. כי כל עניין אפשר להשתנות מן הטוב אל הרע, ומן הרע אל הטוב. Because any of these virtues or inequities, man has control to either change them from good to bad or from bad to good. והכל בבחירתו. And it is all in man's free will. ובעבור זה העניין זכרנו כל מה שהזכרנו מעניין המצוות והעבירות. And because of all of this, bottom line, the man has the ability to change his nefesh, or to perfect his nefesh, by executing the mitzvot and abstaining from averot, is all in accordance to his free will, right? So because of all of this, and that man is not born with any virtue or any inequity. He may have a tendency towards one or the other. However, acquiring a virtue or an inequity is all a function of man's actions. And man's actions are completely to his discretion, complete will over your actions. And that is about half of this 8th chapter. And the rest is already getting into a slightly different idea, different concepts. So we'll leave that for our next class. Next week, Be'ezat Hashem, right? No, Bracha saying no. says וקולה לא יישמע. רק שפתותיה נאות וקולה לא יישמע. It's regarding Hannah. Elisa, Hannah praying, says only her lips were moving and I couldn't hear her voice.
Okay, I'm sorry. So if you want to give a class on Tisha B'Av, like you did last year, you were speaking of.
Oh, right. Okay.
If you want to do that, just let me know.
We'll discuss. We'll see.
Yeah, okay. And if you don't do, I totally understand that.
Okay, all right.
Because this is officially our last Tuesday class. We have then the break. So, and you will be on again on November.
Okay, beseder.
But if
all right, so we'll discuss.
Sorry.
Because this we can't learn on Tisha B'Av. Actually, it'll be after Tisha B'Av, right? We'll discuss.
So, okay, just let me know if you want, and if you don't want, okay, and it's okay.
Beseder.
Okay, I will stop the recording. Yeah?